Hi, I'm Sarah. 7 years ago, my sister Jessica walked down the aisle in my wedding dress to marry my billionaire fiancé while I watched from a hospital bed, recovering from the car accident she caused. Yesterday, at our grandfather's funeral, she saw me step out of my Maserati with my tech empire worth more than Michael ever dreamed of. The look on her face, when she realized I wasn't the broken woman she left behind, was worth every sleepless night I spent building my revenge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember the weight of that diamond ring on my finger, 3 carats of emerald-cut perfection that caught the light every time I moved my hand. Michael had proposed to me on the rooftop of the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Boston, the city sparkling below us like scattered diamonds against black velvet. It was December 15th, exactly 1 year after we'd met at that charity gala where I'd been working as an event coordinator for my small but growing company, Elite Occasions. "Sarah Elizabeth Morrison," he had said, dropping to one knee as snow began to fall around us, "you've turned my world upside down in the best possible way. Will you marry me?" Michael Chen wasn't just wealthy, he was generationally wealthy. His family's investment firm, Chen Capital, managed portfolios worth billions. His personal net worth was somewhere north of 200 million, though he never flaunted it in the vulgar way some rich people do. He drove a modest Tesla, lived in a beautiful but understated penthouse in Back Bay, and donated more money to charity each year than most people would see in a lifetime. What drew me to Michael wasn't his money, though I'd be lying if I said the security it represented didn't appeal to me. Growing up as the daughter of a high school principal and a nurse in the small town of Millbrook, Massachusetts, financial stability had always felt like something other people had. No, what captured my heart was his genuine kindness, his sharp intellect, and the way he looked at me like I was the most fascinating person in any room. Our relationship had been a whirlwind of weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard, quiet dinners at hole-in-the-wall restaurants he'd discovered, and long conversations about everything from philosophy to business strategy. Michael was building something new within his family's firm, a sustainable investment division that focused on clean energy and social impact. He valued my perspective on branding and marketing, often bouncing ideas off me late into the night. "You see things differently than the suits in my office," he would say, twirling pasta around his fork as we sat in our favorite North End trattoria. "You understand people, what motivates them, what makes them trust a brand. That's worth more than any MBA." Those words meant everything to me. I had built Elite Occasions from nothing, starting with a borrowed $5,000 and a laptop in my studio apartment in Somerville. By the time I met Michael, I was coordinating high-end events for Boston's elite, but I was still small enough that landing a single major client could make or break my year. Michael's confidence in my abilities gave me courage to dream bigger. The engagement period was 6 blissful months of planning our future together. We looked at houses in Newton and Brookline, places with enough space for the family we both wanted. Michael was surprisingly involved in wedding planning, having opinions about everything from the flowers to the band. He wanted our day to be perfect, he said, because I deserved nothing less. My sister Jessica had been my maid of honor, naturally. At 26, she was 2 years younger than me, but had always been the beauty of the family. Where I was practical and driven, Jessica was effortlessly charming and stunningly gorgeous. She had inherited our grandmother's classic bone structure, with high cheekbones and green eyes that seemed to change color depending on her mood. Her hair was the kind of golden blonde that looked natural, even though I knew she spent a fortune maintaining it at the best salon in Boston. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Jessica worked as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm downtown, a job that paid well enough for her to afford a trendy apartment in the South End and a wardrobe that belonged in fashion magazines. She had always dated casually, never seeming to find anyone who held her interest for more than a few months. "I'm waiting for someone extraordinary," she would say with a mysterious smile whenever Mom asked about her love life. Looking back, I should have noticed the way Jessica's eyes lingered on Michael when we were all together. I should have paid attention to how she always managed to sit next to him at family dinners, how she laughed just a little too loud at his jokes, how she found excuses to touch his arm when she was making a point. But I was blinded by my own happiness, secure in the knowledge that Michael loved me completely and that my sister would never betray me. Jessica had been incredible during the wedding planning process, taking charge of details I was too busy to handle while growing my business. She coordinated with the florist, confirmed details with the caterer, and even helped me choose my dress. We had spent an entire Saturday at Kleinfeld's Boston location, trying on gown after gown until we found the perfect one. A Vera Wang creation in ivory silk with delicate beading that caught the light like captured stars. "You look like a princess," Jessica had said, tears in her eyes as I stood on the fitting platform. "Michael is going to lose his mind when he sees you." The dress cost more than I had ever spent on a single item of clothing, but Michael had insisted on paying for it. "My bride deserves to feel like the most beautiful woman in the world," he had said when I protested about the price. "Besides, it's an investment. Someday, our daughter will wear it." Our daughter. The phrase had sent warmth spreading through my chest. Michael and I had talked about children, about raising them with values and purpose despite the privilege they would inherit. We wanted 3 kids, we had decided, spaced a few years apart so they could be friends as well as siblings. The wedding was set for June 21st at the Crane Estate in Ipswich, a sprawling mansion overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. We had booked it 18 months in advance, knowing that venues like that were in constant demand. The ceremony would take place in the Rose Garden, with the reception in the estate's grand ballroom. 300 guests were invited, a mix of Michael's business associates, my growing network of clients, and both our extended families. Jessica had thrown me an incredible bachelorette party in the Hamptons, renting a house that cost more per weekend than most people's monthly rent. 12 of my closest friends joined us for 3 days of spa treatments, wine tastings, and late-night conversations on the beach. It was perfect in every way, and Jessica had orchestrated it all with the kind of attention to detail that made her so good at her job. "I want your last weekend as a single woman to be unforgettable," she had said as we watched the sunset from the deck, cosmos in hand. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Sarah. You've worked so hard for everything you have." The night before the wedding, we stayed at the boutique hotel near the venue, the entire wedding party and both families scattered across adjoining rooms. Michael and I had decided to honor tradition and spend the night apart, even though we had been living together in his penthouse for 6 months. I spent the evening with my bridesmaids, drinking champagne and doing face masks, while Jessica painted everyone's nails. "Tomorrow you become Mrs. Chen," my college roommate Katie had said, raising her glass. "Here's to Sarah, who proves that good things really do happen to good people." I had felt so loved that night, surrounded by the people who mattered most to me. My parents were glowing with pride, thrilled that their practical older daughter had found such a wonderful partner. My mom kept tearing up every time she looked at me, and my dad had already given Michael his enthusiastic blessing months earlier. "That boy loves you something fierce," Dad had said after Michael asked for permission to propose. "And more importantly, he respects you. That's what matters in a marriage." Jessica had been the last to leave my room that night, helping me hang up my dress and making sure everything was ready for the morning. She hugged me tightly, and I could smell her signature perfume, something expensive and floral that suited her perfectly. "I love you, Sarah," she had whispered. "Tomorrow is going to be the most beautiful day." I woke up on my wedding day to perfect weather, clear skies with just enough breeze to keep the June heat from being oppressive. The morning was a whirlwind of hair and makeup, with the entire bridal party being pampered by a team of professionals Jessica had coordinated. I felt calm and radiant, exactly how a bride should feel on the most important day of her life. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock, giving us plenty of time for photos and last-minute preparations. By 3:30, I was fully dressed and ready, standing in the bridal suite with my mother making final adjustments to my veil. Through the window, I could see guests beginning to take their seats in the rose garden, the white chairs arranged in perfect rows facing the arbor where Michael and I would exchange vows. "You look absolutely stunning, sweetheart," Mom said, her eyes bright with tears she was trying not to shed. "Your grandmother would be so proud." At 3:45, the photographer gathered the bridal party for final photos before the ceremony. We were supposed to process down the aisle at exactly 4 o'clock, with Jessica leading the way as maid of honor, followed by my 3 other bridesmaids, and finally me on my father's arm. That's when everything went wrong. Jessica was nowhere to be found. Her phone went straight to voicemail when we called, and none of the other bridesmaids had seen her in the past hour. The wedding coordinator looked increasingly frantic as 4 o'clock came and went with no sign of my sister. "We can start without her," I finally said, though my stomach was churning with worry. "Maybe she got sick or had some kind of emergency. We can't keep 300 people waiting." But as we made our way toward the ceremony space, I could hear murmurs from the guests, a ripple of confusion moving through the crowd. The wedding coordinator's radio crackled, and I heard fragments of urgent conversation. "The groom is missing. No one can find Mr. Chen. His phone is going straight to voicemail." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Michael was missing. Jessica was missing. On our wedding day, I stood frozen in the hallway of the estate, my beautiful dress suddenly feeling like a costume, my carefully styled hair and makeup like a mask I couldn't remove. My father appeared at my side, his face grave. "Sarah, sweetheart, we need to talk." He led me to a quiet corner, away from the bridesmaids and the increasingly frantic wedding coordinator. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and showed me a text message that had come through on the family group chat. It was from Jessica. 7 words that shattered my entire world. "I'm sorry, Michael and I are in love." I read the message 3 times before the words penetrated the fog of disbelief that had settled over my mind. My sister. My fiancé. In love. The 3 concepts seemed incompatible, like a mathematical equation that couldn't possibly be solved. "There has to be some mistake," I whispered, but even as I said it, pieces were falling into place. Jessica's frequent visits to our apartment, when Michael was home alone. The way she had insisted on handling so many wedding details that required coordinating with him. Her sudden interest in sustainable investing, asking Michael detailed questions about his work at family dinners. Dad's phone buzzed again. Another message from Jessica, this one longer. "We never meant for this to happen. We fell in love and couldn't stop it. The wedding is off. We'll explain everything later. Please forgive us." The rose garden full of guests. The photographer waiting to capture our first kiss as husband and wife. The reception dinner that had cost more than most people's cars. The honeymoon suite we had booked at the Four Seasons. All of it meaningless now. I don't remember much about the next hour. There were conversations with the wedding coordinator about canceling vendors, awkward announcements to the guests, and uncomfortable phone calls to the hotel about the reception. My parents handled most of it while I sat in a chair in the bridal suite, still wearing my wedding dress, staring at nothing. The dress that Jessica had helped me choose. The dress that Michael had paid for. The dress I was supposed to wear while promising to love and cherish a man who had apparently fallen in love with my sister instead. Katie sat with me while the others dealt with the logistics of a canceled wedding. She didn't try to offer platitudes or explanations. She just held my hand and let me process the magnitude of what had happened. "How long do you think they've been together?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" Katie replied gently. But it did matter to me. I needed to understand when my perfect relationship had become a lie. When my loving fiancé had started looking at my sister the way he used to look at me. When my sister had decided that betraying me was worth whatever she felt for Michael. The answers came over the next few days, revealed in painful fragments through mutual friends and family members who had noticed things I had missed. Michael and Jessica had been seen having lunch together 3 months earlier, just the 2 of them, at a restaurant in downtown Boston. They had been spotted at a wine bar in the South End 6 weeks before the wedding, sitting close together in a corner booth. Jessica had been asking friends about Michael's favorite restaurants, his interests outside of work, his childhood in California. 3 months. For 3 months, while I was excitedly planning our wedding and our future together, my fiancé and my sister had been falling in love with each other. While I was tasting cakes and choosing flowers and addressing invitations, they had been conducting a secret affair that would end with me standing alone in a wedding dress with nowhere to go. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating that I couldn't process it all at once. It came in waves throughout the days that followed. The realization that every family dinner, every group outing, every moment the 3 of us had spent together had been poisoned by their deception. The knowledge that when Michael kissed me goodnight, he might have been thinking about Jessica. The understanding that when Jessica hugged me and told me how happy she was for me, she was actively plotting to destroy my happiness. The worst part was the pity. News of the canceled wedding spread quickly through Boston's social circles, and everywhere I went, I could see it in people's eyes. Poor Sarah Morrison, left at the altar by her billionaire fiancé who ran off with her prettier sister. The story had everything people loved in other people's drama: wealth, betrayal, family dysfunction, and a protagonist who had been publicly humiliated in the most spectacular way possible. Elite occasions suffered immediately. 3 major clients canceled their contracts within a week, not wanting to be associated with someone whose own wedding had been such a disaster. If she can't even keep her own fiancé from running away with her sister, how can we trust her with our events? I overheard one former client saying at a coffee shop in Back Bay, "The financial impact was devastating. I had invested heavily in the business in anticipation of the connections Michael's world would bring. I had hired additional staff, upgraded equipment, and moved to a more expensive office space in the theater district. Without those canceled contracts, I was suddenly operating at a significant loss with no clear path to recovery. But the emotional impact was worse. I felt like a fool for not seeing what was happening right in front of me. I questioned every memory from the past few months, wondering what had been real and what had been performance. Had Michael ever actually loved me, or had I been a placeholder until something better came along? Had Jessica ever actually cared about my happiness, or had she been waiting for the perfect opportunity to take what she wanted? The ring was still sitting on my dresser, 3 carats of mockery that I couldn't bring myself to look at but also couldn't bring myself to put away. Michael had paid for it, but technically it was mine now. I could sell it, return it to him, or throw it into Boston Harbor. None of those options felt right. 2 weeks after the wedding that never happened, I finally heard from them directly. Not a phone call or a visit, but a certified letter delivered to my apartment. It was written in Jessica's handwriting on expensive stationery, the kind she used for thank you notes and formal correspondence. The letter was 2 pages of carefully crafted justification. They hadn't planned for it to happen. They had fought their feelings for months. They knew how much they were hurting me, and they were truly sorry. But sometimes love couldn't be controlled or predicted. They hoped I would eventually understand, and maybe even forgive them. They wanted me to be happy, and they believed that someday I would find someone who would love me the way Michael loved Jessica. The letter felt like a final insult, a carefully worded document that acknowledged my pain while simultaneously justifying their actions. They were sorry for hurting me, but not sorry enough to walk away from each other. They wanted my forgiveness, but not enough to actually face me and ask for it in person. I burned the letter in my kitchen sink, watching the expensive paper curl and blacken as the flames consumed Jessica's elegant handwriting. The smoke alarm went off, filling my apartment with piercing beeps that seemed to match the screaming inside my head. That night, for the first time since the canceled wedding, I cried. Not the dignified tears of a woman processing grief, but ugly, gut-wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal. I cried for the future I had lost, for the trust that had been shattered, for the naive woman I had been just 2 weeks earlier who believed that love and loyalty meant something. But somewhere in the midst of that breakdown, something else emerged. A cold, clear anger that burned away the self-pity and confusion. They had humiliated me, betrayed me, and destroyed my business. They had stolen my future and left me with nothing but sympathy and pity from a city full of people who would never let me forget what had happened. Fine. If they wanted to see what someone looked like when they had nothing left to lose, I would show them. If they thought they had broken me, they were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. The old Sarah Morrison was dead, buried along with her wedding dress and her naive faith in the people she loved most. What emerged from that wreckage would be something harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than anything Jessica or Michael could imagine. They had taken everything from me. Now I was going to build something so much better that their betrayal would look like the best thing that ever happened to me. And someday, when they least expected it, they would realize exactly what they had lost. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, 3 months after my world had imploded. I stared at the official document taped to my apartment door, the words blurring together as I tried to process what I was reading. 60 days to vacate. Outstanding rent totaling $8,000. Legal action pending. I had been so focused on trying to salvage what remained of elite occasions that I hadn't properly managed my personal finances. The canceled wedding contracts had created a domino effect that I was only beginning to understand. Without those major clients, I couldn't pay my business expenses, which meant I had been dipping into my personal savings to keep the company afloat. Now both my business and personal accounts were nearly empty, and my landlord had finally lost patience with my excuses and partial payments. Standing in the hallway of my Somerville apartment building, still wearing yesterday's clothes because I had fallen asleep at my desk again, I felt the full weight of how far I had fallen. 3 months ago, I had been planning a honeymoon in Santorini and looking at houses in Newton. Now I was facing homelessness and bankruptcy, all because I had trusted the 2 people who were supposed to love me most in the world. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Haven't heard from you in weeks. Dad and I are worried. Please call." The guilt hit me immediately. I had been avoiding my parents since the wedding disaster, partly because I was embarrassed, and partly because I couldn't handle their well-meaning attempts to make me feel better. They kept suggesting I move back to Millbrook temporarily, get back on my feet in a place where people knew and cared about me. But going home felt like admitting defeat, like confirming that I really was the pathetic victim everyone believed me to be. I unlocked my apartment and stepped inside, surveying the chaos that had become my living space. Empty takeout containers covered every surface, business documents were scattered across the floor, and my laptop was permanently stationed on the coffee table, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled papers. The beautiful fresh flowers Michael used to send me every Friday had been replaced by dying plants I couldn't remember to water. The contrast to my former life was stark and humiliating. 6 months ago, this same apartment had been my sanctuary, carefully decorated with pieces I had collected over years of building my business. Now it looked like the home of someone who had given up on everything, including basic hygiene and self-care. I walked to my bedroom and caught sight of myself in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back at me was almost unrecognizable. My hair, which I used to have styled professionally every 6 weeks, was lank and pulled back in a messy ponytail. My skin was pale and broken out from stress and poor nutrition. I had lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, making my clothes hang loosely on my frame. Worst of all were my eyes, which had lost the spark of ambition and confidence that had once defined me. This wasn't grief anymore. This was complete capitulation. I had allowed Jessica and Michael's betrayal to destroy not just my heart, but my entire sense of self. I was living like someone who had accepted that her life was over at 28, that her best days were behind her and all that remained was surviving the aftermath of her spectacular failure. My laptop chimed with an email notification, probably another vendor demanding payment or a former client expressing their sympathy while simultaneously distancing themselves from my toxic brand. I ignored it and walked to the kitchen, opening the refrigerator to find nothing but condiments and a container of Chinese takeout that might have been from last week. The phone rang, and my mother's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, just as I had been doing for weeks. A few minutes later, my father called, then my mother again. They were escalating their concern, probably debating whether they needed to drive to Boston to check on me in person. That's when I heard the knock on my door. Not the polite tap of a neighbor or delivery person, but the firm, authoritative knock of someone who wasn't going away. I looked through the peephole and saw my best friend Katie standing in the hallway, her arms crossed and her expression determined. "I know you're in there, Sarah," she called through the door. "I can hear you breathing, and Mrs. Chen from downstairs told me you've been hiding in there for weeks. Open the door, or I'm calling your parents and telling them you're having a complete breakdown." The threat of involving my parents was enough to get me moving. I unlocked the door and opened it reluctantly, squinting against the bright hallway light like some kind of cave dweller. Katie took one look at me and her expression shifted from determination to shock. "Oh, honey," she said softly, pushing past me into the apartment. "This is so much worse than I thought." She surveyed the chaos of my living space with the analytical eye of someone who worked in crisis management for a major corporation. Katie had been my roommate in college and my closest friend ever since, the kind of person who would tell you the truth even when it hurt. She was also successful in her own right, having built a career in corporate communications that had earned her a corner office and a 6-figure salary by age 30. "When was the last time you showered?" she asked, not unkindly but with the directness that made her so effective in her professional life. I honestly couldn't remember. "Yesterday? Maybe the day before?" "When was the last time you ate a real meal?" Not takeout, but actual food. Again, I drew a blank. Time had become fluid in the months since the wedding, days blending together in a haze of failed business calls and self-pity. Katie walked to my kitchen and started throwing away the empty containers and spoiled food, moving with the efficiency of someone who had dealt with crisis situations before. "Here's what's going to happen," she said without looking at me. "You're going to shower and put on clean clothes. Then we're going to sit down and make a plan to get your life back on track. And I don't want to hear any excuses about how you can't or won't or how everything is hopeless." "You don't understand," I started, but she cut me off with a sharp look. "I understand perfectly. You've been wallowing for 3 months, and now you're facing eviction because you've let everything fall apart. But here's what you're not understanding. This doesn't have to be the end of your story. This can be the beginning of something better if you stop feeling sorry for yourself long enough to fight back." Her words stung because they were true. I had been wallowing, using my heartbreak as an excuse to avoid dealing with the practical realities of rebuilding my life. It was easier to lie in bed feeling sorry for myself than to face the enormous task of starting over from nothing. "Katie, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but you don't know how bad things really are. Elite Occasions is finished. I'm about to be evicted. I have maybe $2,000 left in my checking account. Jessica and Michael destroyed everything I built, and I don't have the energy to start over." Katie stopped cleaning and turned to face me fully. "Do you want to know what I think about Jessica and Michael?" I wasn't sure I did, but I nodded anyway. "I think they did you the biggest favor of your life, and you're too busy feeling sorry for yourself to see it." The statement was so unexpected, so contrary to everything I had been thinking for months, that I actually laughed. A bitter, hollow sound, but a laugh nonetheless. "How could you possibly think that?" Katie sat down on my couch, moving aside a stack of unpaid bills to make room. "Because they showed you exactly who they were before you wasted decades of your life with them. Michael turned out to be the kind of man who falls in love with his fiancé's sister and doesn't have the courage to break up with her before pursuing someone else. Jessica turned out to be the kind of woman who would betray her own sister for a man. Do you really want those people in your life?" I had been so focused on what I had lost that I hadn't considered what I had been saved from: a marriage to a man who was capable of such profound deception. A lifetime of wondering if I could trust my own sister. Years of building a life with someone who apparently didn't value loyalty or honesty. "Besides," Katie continued, "you're acting like your life is over when you're 28 years old with a decade of business experience and a network of contacts that most people would kill for. So what if Elite Occasions failed? So what if some rich guy turned out to be a disappointment? You're smart, you're talented, and you're completely free to build whatever life you want without having to consider anyone else's opinions or needs." She made it sound so simple, but I knew it wasn't. "Katie, I don't have any money. I don't have any clients. My reputation in Boston is ruined. Everyone knows me as the woman who got left at the altar by her billionaire fiancé. That's not exactly a great foundation for starting over. So don't start over in Boston," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Go somewhere else. Start fresh, where nobody knows your story or cares about your past. Use this as an opportunity to become whoever you want to be." The idea was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Leave Boston, the only city I had ever worked in as an adult. Leave behind the network of contacts I had spent years building. Leave behind the comfortable familiarity of home and venture into the unknown with nothing but whatever remained of my savings and my determination to prove that I was more than a victim. "Where would I even go?" I asked, more to myself than to Katie. "Anywhere," she replied. "New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. Pick a city where there are opportunities, and go make something happen. You know the events industry better than most people, twice your age. You understand what clients want and how to deliver it. The only thing holding you back is your own fear." That night, after Katie had helped me clean my apartment and forced me to eat a proper meal, I sat at my laptop researching cities where I could potentially restart my career. New York was the obvious choice for someone in the events industry. but it was also expensive and competitive in ways that might crush someone already struggling with confidence. Los Angeles had opportunities, but I knew nothing about the culture or the market. Chicago kept coming up in my research. It was a major city with a thriving business community, but it wasn't as saturated with event planning companies as New York or Los Angeles. The cost of living was more reasonable, which meant my limited savings would stretch further. And perhaps most importantly, it was far enough from Boston that I could truly start fresh without constantly running into people who knew my story. I spent hours reading about Chicago's event scene, researching venues and vendors and potential competitors. The more I learned, the more intrigued I became. The city had a rich cultural scene, a strong corporate presence, and what appeared to be a gap in the market for the kind of high-end personal service that had made elite occasions successful before everything fell apart. But research was easy. Actually making the move would require a level of courage I wasn't sure I possessed. It would mean admitting that my life in Boston was truly over, that there was no going back to the way things had been. It would mean starting completely over with no safety net, no family nearby, and no guarantee of success. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking constantly about Katie's words. Was I really going to let Jessica and Michael's betrayal define the rest of my life? Was I going to spend the next decade as the woman who never recovered from being left at the altar? Or was I going to prove that I was stronger than their worst assumptions about me? The decision crystallized when I received an email from a former client, someone whose wedding I had coordinated 2 years earlier. She was reaching out to express her sympathy about what had happened and to let me know that she had heard Jessica was now working with some of Boston's top event planners, leveraging her connection to the Chen family to build her own career in the industry. The irony was devastating. Jessica hadn't just stolen my fiancé, she was now building a career on the foundation of my professional relationships and Michael's social connections. While I was hiding in my apartment feeling sorry for myself, she was networking at charity galas and private parties, probably telling people how sorry she was about what had happened, while simultaneously positioning herself as the talented sister who could deliver the same quality work without the emotional baggage. I closed my laptop and walked to my closet, pulling out the suitcases I hadn't touched since my planned honeymoon. If Jessica wanted to build her life on the ruins of mine, she was welcome to it, but she wasn't going to get the satisfaction of watching me disappear completely. That weekend, I started making concrete plans to leave Boston. I researched apartments in Chicago, contacted moving companies, and began the process of closing down what remained of elite occasions. It was painful to officially dissolve the business I had built from nothing, but it was also liberating to shed the weight of failure and disappointment that had been crushing me for months. The hardest part was telling my parents. I drove to Millbrook on a Sunday afternoon, finding them in their garden where they spent most of their free time during the warmer months. They looked older than I remembered, worry lines etched deeper around their eyes from months of concern about their eldest daughter. "Chicago?" my mother repeated when I told them my plans. "Sweetheart, that's so far away, and you don't know anyone there." "That's exactly the point, Mom. I need to start fresh somewhere that Jessica and Michael's shadow doesn't reach. I need to prove to myself that I can build something meaningful without their help or their interference." My father, always the practical one, wanted to know about my finances and my business plan. I was honest about how limited my resources were, but I also shared my research about the Chicago market and my ideas for how to position myself in a new city. "I think it's brave," he said finally, surprising both my mother and me. "You've always been the kind of person who faces challenges head-on. These past few months haven't been like you at all. Maybe getting away from all the reminders and starting fresh is exactly what you need." My mother took longer to come around, but eventually she admitted that staying in Boston didn't seem to be helping my recovery. "I just worry about you being alone in a big city with no support system," she said. "I'll build a new support system," I replied with more confidence than I felt. "And I'll visit regularly. Chicago isn't on the other side of the world." 2 weeks later, I loaded everything I owned into a rental truck and started driving west. I had found a small one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, a neighborhood that seemed to offer a good balance of professional opportunities and personal amenities. I had enough money saved to cover my living expenses for about 6 months if I was careful, which I calculated should be enough time to get a new version of my business off the ground. The drive to Chicago was long and lonely, giving me hours to think about what I was leaving behind and what I hoped to find ahead. I thought about Jessica and Michael, probably planning their own future together in the life that should have been mine. I thought about the friends and family I was leaving in Massachusetts, and whether I would ever feel truly at home anywhere again. But mostly, I thought about the woman I wanted to become. Not the naive idealist who had believed that love and loyalty were enough to protect her from betrayal. Not the broken victim who had spent months hiding from the world. Someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who understood that the only person she could truly depend on was herself. As the Boston skyline disappeared in my rearview mirror, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was real. Jessica and Michael had taken everything I thought I wanted, but they had also freed me from the constraints of trying to be the person I thought they needed me to be. Now I could become anyone I chose to be, and I was going to make sure that when they finally saw me again, they would realize exactly what they had lost. Chicago in October was a revelation. The city buzzed with an energy that Boston had never possessed, a sense of possibility that seemed to rise from the very sidewalks. I stood on the roof deck of my Lincoln Park apartment building, watching the sun set over Lake Michigan, and felt something stirring inside me that I had almost forgotten existed: ambition. 3 weeks into my new life, I had already identified the gaps in Chicago's luxury event planning market. The established companies were either too corporate and impersonal, or too focused on weddings to properly service the high-end corporate and social events that drove the most revenue. There was room for someone who understood both the intimate details that made events memorable and the business acumen required to scale successfully. I had spent my first week in Chicago doing nothing but walking the city, exploring neighborhoods, visiting potential venues, and observing how people moved through their daily lives. Lincoln Park was perfect for my needs, close enough to downtown for business meetings, but residential enough to feel like home. The Gold Coast offered the kind of upscale venues my target clients would expect, while River North provided the trendy spaces that would appeal to tech companies and startups. My apartment was sparse but functional, furnished with pieces from IKEA and Target that served their purpose without demanding too much of my limited budget. I had set up a proper home office in the second bedroom, complete with a desk, filing cabinet, and professional lighting for video calls. The walls were bare white, waiting for the success I planned to hang there eventually. The first real test of my resolve came when I attended a networking event hosted by the Chicago Association of Event Planners. Walking into that room full of strangers, knowing that I would have to introduce myself and explain my background without mentioning the spectacular failure that had driven me from Boston, felt like stepping onto a stage without knowing my lines. "I'm Sarah Morrison." I practiced in the mirror before leaving my apartment. I recently relocated from Boston, where I ran a boutique event planning company focused on high-end corporate and social events. I'm exploring opportunities to bring that expertise to the Chicago market. It was true without being complete, professional without being overly personal. I had learned that successful reinvention required careful curation of information, not lying, exactly, but strategic editing. The networking event was held at the Peninsula Hotel, in a ballroom that showcased exactly the kind of sophisticated elegance I wanted to be associated with. The attendees were a mix of established business owners, freelance planners, and vendors looking to build relationships. I observed them carefully, noting the subtle hierarchies and alliance patterns that existed in any professional community. "You're new," said a woman with perfectly styled silver hair and expensive jewelry. "I know everyone in this room, and I definitely haven't seen you before." Margaret Sinclair turned out to be the owner of Chicago's most established luxury event planning firm, the kind of woman who had built her business through decades of meticulous relationship management and flawless execution. She was exactly the type of person I needed to learn from, and potentially the kind of competitor I would eventually need to surpass. "I just moved here from Boston," I told her, offering my carefully rehearsed introduction. "I'm exploring the market and learning about the opportunities here." Margaret studied me with the shrewd assessment of someone who had spent years evaluating talent and competition. "Boston's a tough market, very insular. What made you decide to leave? The question I had been dreading, asked by exactly the person whose opinion could make or break my entry into Chicago's event planning scene. I had prepared for this moment, but actually facing it required a level of composure I wasn't entirely sure I possessed. I was ready for a new challenge, I said, meeting her gaze directly. Boston's market is saturated with established players. Chicago offers more room for innovation and growth. It wasn't entirely untrue, though it wasn't the complete story either. Margaret seemed to accept it, nodding slowly as she processed my response. Innovation is certainly needed, she agreed. Too many planners here are stuck in old patterns, doing the same events the same way they've always done them. The clients are getting bored, looking for fresh perspectives. She introduced me to several other attendees, positioning me as someone worth knowing rather than a potential threat. It was a generous gesture that I appreciated and filed away for future reciprocation. In a relationship-driven industry like event planning, early allies were invaluable. I left the networking event with business cards from 12 potential collaborators and 3 possible clients who were looking for planners for upcoming projects. More importantly, I left with a clearer understanding of how Chicago's event planning ecosystem functioned and where I might fit within it. The first real opportunity came 2 days later, when one of the contacts from the networking event called with an urgent request. Her regular planner had canceled last minute on a corporate holiday party for a tech startup, and she needed someone who could step in with only 3 weeks' notice. It's not a huge budget, she warned. $15,000 for everything, including venue, catering, entertainment, and decor. But if you can pull it off successfully, there could be more work down the line. $15,000 was more money than I had seen in months, and the timeline was tight enough to be challenging without being impossible. I accepted immediately, then spent the rest of the day researching the client company and brainstorming concepts that would deliver maximum impact within their budget constraints. The company was called TechFlow, a software development firm that specialized in productivity applications for small businesses. Their employees were young, creative, and diverse, and their CEO had specifically requested an event that would feel fresh and energetic rather than traditional or corporate. I spent the weekend scouting venues that could accommodate their 100-person guest list within budget. Traditional hotel ballrooms were too expensive and too formal. Restaurant private dining rooms were too small. I needed something unique that would reinforce the innovative brand image TechFlow was trying to project. The solution came from an unexpected source: a converted warehouse in the West Loop that had been transformed into an art gallery and event space. The raw brick walls and exposed ceiling beams provided industrial elegance, while the gallery's rotating exhibitions would give guests something interesting to look at and discuss. The rental fee was reasonable, and the in-house catering team specialized in creative small plates that would appeal to a young, sophisticated crowd. I pitched the concept to TechFlow's CEO over coffee at a Lincoln Park cafe, bringing mood boards and vendor proposals that demonstrated how every element would work together to create a cohesive experience. The gallery setting would reinforce their image as a forward-thinking company. The artisanal food stations would encourage networking and conversation. The local jazz trio I had found would provide sophisticated background music without overwhelming the space. "This is exactly what we were hoping for," the CEO said, reviewing my proposal. "How did you put this together so quickly?" "Experience," I replied with a smile. "And the advantage of fresh eyes. Sometimes being new to a market means you see opportunities that others have overlooked." She hired me on the spot, and I walked out of that coffee shop feeling more like myself than I had in months. This was what I was good at: understanding what clients really wanted, finding creative solutions within budget constraints, and executing events that exceeded expectations. The TechFlow holiday party was a resounding success. The gallery setting proved perfect for their brand image. The food was both delicious and Instagram-worthy, and the jazz trio created exactly the sophisticated but relaxed atmosphere the CEO had envisioned. Most importantly, the guests had a genuine good time, which was always the ultimate measure of an event's success. Word spread quickly through Chicago's startup community. Within 2 weeks of the TechFlow party, I had inquiries from 3 other companies looking for someone who could bring fresh creativity to their corporate events. None of them offered huge budgets, but together they represented the foundation of what could become a sustainable business. I began operating under a new company name, Morrison Events. Simple, professional, and completely divorced from the elite occasions brand that had become associated with failure and public humiliation. This was my clean slate, my opportunity to build something new without the baggage of my past mistakes. The work was demanding in ways that elite occasions had never been. In Boston, I had built my business gradually over several years, developing relationships and reputation slowly. In Chicago, I was starting from zero, with clients who had no reason to trust me beyond my ability to deliver results. Every event was an audition for the next one, every interaction a chance to prove that I deserved their confidence. But the pressure was also invigorating. I found myself working longer hours than I had in years, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Each successful event felt like a small victory against the voice in my head that whispered, I was destined to fail. That Jessica and Michael had been right to abandon me, that I would never recover from the humiliation they had inflicted. The breakthrough came in December, when Margaret Sinclair called with an unusual request. One of her biggest clients, a pharmaceutical company, was hosting their annual board retreat in February. The event required the kind of high-level sophistication and flawless execution that Margaret's firm was known for. But she was overbooked and couldn't take on the project herself. I've been watching your work, she said during our lunch meeting at the Four Seasons. The TechFlow party was impressive, and I've heard good things about your other events. This client is demanding and unforgiving, but if you can handle their retreat successfully, it will establish your reputation with Chicago's corporate elite. The pharmaceutical company's retreat was everything Margaret had warned me it would be. The CEO was notorious for his perfectionist tendencies, and had fired 3 different planning companies in the past 2 years for failing to meet his exacting standards. The budget was substantial, but so were the expectations. Every detail had to be flawless, from the welcome reception to the closing dinner. I spent weeks preparing for the retreat, visiting the resort location multiple times, coordinating with vendors, and creating contingency plans for every possible scenario. The CEO's assistant provided me with a detailed list of preferences and requirements that ran to 14 pages, covering everything from the specific brands of bottled water he preferred to the exact temperature the meeting rooms needed to be maintained. The retreat itself was a 3-day intensive that combined business meetings with team-building activities and social events. I was responsible for coordinating transportation, accommodation, all meals and refreshments, entertainment, and the logistical details that would allow the executives to focus entirely on their strategic discussions. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. The catering company delivered the wrong appetizers for the welcome reception. The AV equipment malfunctioned during the CEO's opening presentation. A snowstorm delayed the arrival of the keynote speaker for the closing dinner. Each crisis required immediate problem-solving and diplomatic communication with increasingly frustrated executives. But I handled every challenge with the kind of calm professionalism I had learned during my years building elite occasions. I had backup vendors on standby, alternative menu options prepared, and contingency plans that most people would have considered overly cautious. When the original keynote speaker couldn't make it due to the weather, I convinced a local business school dean to step in with only 4 hours' notice. By the end of the retreat, the CEO, who had been notorious for firing event planners, was asking for my business card and inquiring about my availability for their next major event. More importantly, every executive at that retreat now knew my name and had witnessed my ability to manage complex, high-stakes events under pressure. The pharmaceutical retreat led to 5 new corporate clients within a month. Margaret began referring overflow work to me regularly, treating me as a trusted colleague rather than a potential competitor. My apartment's spare bedroom had been transformed into a proper office, and I was considering hiring my first assistant to help manage the increasing workload. But the real transformation wasn't just professional. I was becoming someone I had never been before, completely self-reliant and confident in my own abilities. In Boston, even during the most successful years of elite occasions, I had always felt like I was proving myself to someone else. First to my parents, who worried about my unconventional career choice, then to Michael, who admired my ambition but sometimes seemed surprised by my business acumen. In Chicago, I was accountable only to myself and my clients. There was no one to impress except the people who hired me, no one to seek approval from except my own standards of excellence. The woman who had once planned her entire future around a man who would eventually betray her was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the only security worth having was the kind you built yourself. I began to understand that Jessica and Michael had done more than break my heart and destroy my business. They had shattered the illusion that happiness and success were things that happened to you if you were good enough, loyal enough, deserving enough. Real happiness and success, I was learning, were things you created for yourself, through talent, determination, and the willingness to take risks that others wouldn't. 6 months after arriving in Chicago with nothing but a few suitcases and a broken heart, I was building something bigger and better than anything I had achieved in Boston. Morrison Events was developing a reputation for innovative thinking and flawless execution. My client list included some of the city's most influential companies. My personal savings account was growing for the first time in years. More importantly, I was becoming the kind of person who could look back at her former life without regret or bitterness. Jessica could have Michael and all the complications that came with building a life on betrayal. I was building something that belonged entirely to me, something that no one could take away or destroy because it existed independent of anyone else's choices or feelings. The woman who had been left at the altar was disappearing, replaced by someone stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than anyone who had known the old Sarah Morrison could possibly imagine. The morning Jessica made the call to Dr. Martinez about palliative care, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad covered in her careful handwriting. She looked up when I entered, and there was a clarity in her eyes that I hadn't seen since before her diagnosis. "I've been making lists," she said, tapping the pad with her pen. "Things I want to finish, people I want to see, conversations I need to have." I poured myself coffee and sat down across from her. "What kind of conversations?" Jessica hesitated, then turned the pad so I could see what she had written. At the top of the page, in bold letters, she had written truth. Below that were several bullet points. Tell Sarah about the will. Talk to Mom and Dad. Finish the Phoenix painting. Exhibition at Morrison Gallery. Letter to Michael. I've been lying to people, Sarah. Not big lies, but lies of omission. Pretending things are okay when they're not. Pretending I agree with decisions I never actually made. She traced the edge of the paper with her finger. I don't want to die as a person I'm not. What do you mean about the will? Jessica took a deep breath. I changed my will 3 months ago, when I realized the cancer wasn't responding to treatment. I never told Michael because I knew he would try to talk me out of it. He thinks everything is going to him automatically because we're married, but that's not what I want. A chill ran down my spine. What did you change? Everything. The house, the life insurance money, my art collection, my studio. I left it all to you. She saw my expression and quickly continued. Not because I don't love Michael, but because I don't trust him to preserve what matters to me. He's already talking about selling my paintings after I die, calling them clutter that will just take up space. I stared at her, speechless. The implications of what she was telling me were staggering. Jessica, are you sure about this? I mean, I'm honored, but Michael is your husband. He'll expect to inherit everything and make decisions about my legacy based on what's convenient for him, she interrupted. But you understand the value of my art. You'll make sure it's preserved and shared with people who will appreciate it. Have you told him anything about this? No, and I'm not going to until after I'm gone. The lawyer said I don't have to notify him of changes to the will unless I want to. Jessica reached across the table and took my hand. But I need you to know so you can be prepared. There's going to be a letter for you that explains everything. Mr. Harrison has it in his office. The weight of what she was trusting me with was almost overwhelming. Jessica, this is huge. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Her voice was steady, resolved. Michael has controlled every aspect of our marriage, but he's not going to control how I'm remembered or what happens to the things that matter most to me. Later that afternoon, we met with Dr. Martinez to discuss palliative care options. The conversation was difficult but necessary, covering everything from pain management to end-of-life preferences. Jessica was remarkably composed throughout the meeting, asking practical questions and making decisions with a clarity that impressed both the doctor and me. When we returned home, Michael was waiting in the living room with a stack of papers spread across the coffee table. His expression was tense, angry. "I've been doing research while you were at your appointment," he said without preamble. "I found 3 more clinical trials that Jessica might qualify for. 1 in Boston, 1 in Houston, and 1 right here in Columbus." Jessica sat down wearily in her favorite chair. "Michael, I already told you. I'm not doing any more experimental treatments." "You told me that before you had all the information," he replied, picking up one of the papers. "This trial in Boston has a 30% response rate in patients with advanced pancreatic cancer. Those are better odds than anything we've tried so far." "A 30% chance of what?" I asked, reading over his shoulder. "Temporary tumor shrinkage? Extended survival by a few months? What's the quality of life during treatment?" Michael glared at me. "The point is that there's hope. There are still options we haven't explored." "Michael," Jessica said quietly, "I met with Dr. Martinez today to discuss hospice care. I'm not going to pursue any more aggressive treatments." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stared at Jessica as if she had physically struck him. "Hospice care? You mean you're officially giving up?" "I'm officially accepting reality and choosing to spend whatever time I have left feeling as good as possible." Michael's composure cracked completely. "This is unacceptable, Jessica. This is not the woman I married. The woman I married wouldn't quit fighting for our future together." "The woman you married didn't have terminal cancer," Jessica replied, her voice growing stronger. "And the future you're talking about doesn't exist." "I'm dying, Michael. The sooner you accept that, the sooner we can focus on making our remaining time together meaningful." "I refuse to accept it," Michael said, standing up and beginning to pace. "I refuse to stand by and watch you commit suicide by giving up on treatment." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Jessica's face went pale, and I saw her hands begin to tremble. "How dare you?" I said, rising from my chair. "How dare you accuse her of committing suicide for making an informed decision about her own medical care?" "Stay out of this, Sarah," Michael snapped. "This is between my wife and me." "No, it's not," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper but filled with steel. "Sarah has been more supportive of me in the past 8 months than you've been in the past 8 years. She gets a voice in this conversation." Michael turned on Jessica with fury in his eyes. 8 years? You're saying I haven't been supportive for 8 years? Who do you think paid for your art supplies when your paintings weren't selling? Who do you think supported you financially while you played artist, instead of getting a real job? "I never asked you to support my art," Jessica said, standing up shakily. "You offered, and then you held it over my head every time I created something you didn't understand or approve of. I supported your hobby because I thought it made you happy. I didn't realize it was more important to you than our marriage or your life." "My art is my life," Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. "It's who I am. It's how I make sense of the world. And yes, it is more important to me than your need to control every aspect of our relationship." The fighting escalated from there, with Michael accusing Jessica of being selfish and ungrateful, and Jessica finally expressing years of suppressed resentment about his controlling behavior. I tried to mediate, but both of them were too angry and hurt to listen to reason. Finally, Michael grabbed his keys and stormed out, declaring that he needed time to think about whether he could stay married to someone who cared so little about their life together. After he left, Jessica collapsed onto the couch, emotionally and physically drained. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah. I can't spend my last months fighting with him about every decision I make." "You shouldn't have to," I said, sitting beside her and pulling her into my arms. "You should be surrounded by people who love and support you, not people who make you feel guilty for being sick." "Maybe he's right," she said quietly. "Maybe I am being selfish." "Jessica, listen to me. Choosing comfort over suffering is not selfish. Choosing dignity over false hope is not selfish. Making decisions about your own body and your own life is not selfish. It's your right." That night, Jessica asked me to help her set up an easel in her bedroom. She wanted to work on what she called her final series, a collection of paintings that represented her journey through illness and toward acceptance of death. The first painting she started was unlike anything she had ever created before. It was abstract but emotionally powerful, with deep blues and purples swirling around a bright center of gold and white. "It's called Release," she told me as she worked. "It's about letting go of the life I thought I was going to have and embracing the life I actually lived." Over the next few days, Michael's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would disappear for hours without explanation, then return and act as if nothing had happened. He stopped sleeping in their bedroom, claiming that Jessica's medications kept him awake. Most troubling of all, he began making comments about their finances and the burden of Jessica's medical bills. "I had to take out a second mortgage on the house," he announced one evening while I was helping Jessica with dinner. "The insurance doesn't cover everything, and my commission income has dropped because I've had to take so much time off." The statement felt calculated, designed to make Jessica feel guilty about the cost of her illness. "Michael," I said carefully, "maybe this would be a good time to look into the social services Dr. Martinez mentioned. There are programs that can help with medical expenses." "We don't need charity," Michael replied curtly. "We just need Jessica to make rational decisions about treatment, instead of giving up at the first sign of difficulty." Jessica flinched as if he had slapped her. She had been fighting cancer for nearly a year, enduring months of brutal chemotherapy and multiple hospitalizations. Calling her decision to stop treatment giving up at the first sign of difficulty was cruel and inaccurate. "Michael," Jessica said, quietly, "if money is such a concern, maybe we should talk about selling some of my paintings. I know you think they're just taking up space, but some of them might have value to collectors." Michael's eyes lit up with interest, and I felt my stomach churn. "That's actually not a bad idea. I could contact some galleries, see what they think pieces might be worth." "No," I said quickly, unable to stop myself. "Jessica, your paintings are part of your legacy. You shouldn't have to sell them to pay for medical care." "Sarah's right," Jessica said, looking surprised at her own words. "My paintings represent 30 years of work. They're not just commodities to be sold when money gets tight." Michael's expression darkened. "So let me understand this. Jessica is worried about being a financial burden, but she's not willing to liquidate assets that could help pay for her care? That seems contradictory." "Those paintings are the most important thing in my life besides my family," Jessica said, her voice growing stronger. "I'm not selling them to pay for treatments I don't even want." "Fine," Michael said, his tone ice-cold. "But don't expect me to work myself to death paying for your medical bills when you have valuable assets you're refusing to use." The manipulation was so transparent it made me sick. Michael was creating financial pressure to force Jessica to either sell her art or return to aggressive treatment that would generate more medical bills. Either way, he would get what he wanted: control over her decisions. That night, after Michael had gone to bed in the guest room, Jessica and I sat in her art studio looking through her portfolio. She had been painting for over 30 years, and the collection represented an incredible body of work. Early pieces showed her development as an artist, while more recent works revealed a mature vision and sophisticated technique. "I want to have an exhibition," Jessica said suddenly. "Not after I die, but while I'm still here to see it. I want people to see what I've created. I want to know that my work mattered." "That's a wonderful idea," I said, looking through paintings that took my breath away. "Where were you thinking?" "The Morrison Gallery downtown has been after me for years to do a show. The owner, Patricia Morrison, used to buy pieces from me regularly before I got married. She always said I should have a solo exhibition when I was ready." "Why didn't you ever do it?" Jessica was quiet for a moment. "Michael always said it was too soon, that I needed more prestigious pieces in my portfolio first. He said small-town galleries weren't worth the effort." She laughed bitterly. "I realize now that he didn't want me to succeed as an artist, because it would have given me independence." "It's not too late," I said firmly. "You could call Patricia tomorrow." "What if she says no? What if she doesn't think my work is good enough anymore? Then we'll find somewhere else." "But Jess, looking at these paintings, I can't imagine anyone saying no. This work is extraordinary." The next morning, Jessica called Patricia Morrison. I could only hear one side of the conversation, but from Jessica's expressions, it was going well. When she hung up, she was crying with happiness. She said yes, Jessica said through her tears. She said she's been hoping I would call for years. She wants to do the exhibition next month, in February. She thinks we can have everything ready in 3 weeks. That's amazing! I hugged her tightly. We need to start planning immediately. There's so much to do, Jessica said, suddenly energized in a way I hadn't seen since before her diagnosis. We need to select the pieces, write descriptions, plan the opening reception. Patricia wants to invite art critics from Columbus and Cleveland. For the next several hours, we worked on planning the exhibition. Jessica selected 25 paintings that represented the full scope of her artistic journey. We wrote descriptions for each piece and began planning the layout of the gallery space. Jessica was more animated and focused than she had been in months, and I could see glimpses of the vibrant, creative woman she had been before illness, and Michael's influence had dimmed her light. When Michael came home that evening, he found us surrounded by paintings and notebooks, planning details for the exhibition. His expression when he saw what we were doing was a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. "What's all this?" he asked, looking around the living room where we had spread out Jessica's work. "I'm having an exhibition at Morrison Gallery next month," Jessica announced, her voice filled with excitement. "Patricia Morrison called it a retrospective of my work. She thinks it could be really significant for my artistic legacy." Michael stared at the paintings for a long moment. "Jessica, you're dying. Why are you wasting energy on something like this when you should be focusing on getting better?" The comments sucked all the joy out of the room. Jessica's face fell, and I could see her beginning to second-guess herself. "This isn't a waste of energy," I said firmly. "This is Jessica, sharing her life's work with the world. This is about creating a meaningful legacy." "Sarah," Michael said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I know you mean well, but encouraging Jessica to exhaust herself with unnecessary projects isn't helping her. She needs to conserve her strength for medical treatments." "I'm not doing any more medical treatments," Jessica said quietly, "and this exhibition is important to me. It's something I've wanted to do for years." "You've wanted to do a lot of things over the years," Michael replied. "That doesn't mean they were all good ideas." The dismissive way he said it revealed everything about how he had always viewed Jessica's artistic ambitions. To him, her art had never been anything more than a hobby that he tolerated when it was convenient and discouraged when it wasn't. "Michael," Jessica said, her voice growing stronger, "this exhibition is happening. With or without your support, it's happening." It was the first time I had ever heard Jessica directly defy Michael about something important to her. The look of shock on his face suggested it was the first time he had heard it too. "Fine," he said after a long pause. "Exhaust yourself planning an art show, but don't come crying to me when you're too sick to enjoy it." As he walked away, Jessica turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Am I making a mistake, Sarah? Am I being foolish?" "You're being brave," I said, taking her hands in mine. "You're choosing to celebrate your life and your art, instead of letting fear control your decisions. That's not foolish, that's beautiful." The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Despite her declining physical condition, Jessica threw herself into preparing for the exhibition with an energy that surprised everyone, including her doctors. We spent hours each day at Morrison Gallery, working with Patricia and her staff to create the perfect presentation of Jessica's work. The paintings looked magnificent in the gallery's professional lighting and spacious rooms. Seeing them displayed properly for the first time, I was struck by the depth and evolution of Jessica's artistic vision. Early works showed promise and technical skill, but the later pieces revealed a mature artist with something profound to say about beauty, loss, and the human experience. Michael's reaction to the exhibition preparations was to become increasingly absent and hostile. He made snide comments about the time and energy Jessica was investing in the show, and he refused to participate in any of the planning. When Jessica asked him to help with the guest list for the opening reception, he told her he might not even attend. "I don't understand why you're doing this to yourself," he said one evening, when Jessica was too exhausted to eat dinner after a long day at the gallery. "You're making yourself sicker for what? So a few people can look at your paintings and say nice things?" "It's not about nice things," Jessica replied wearily. "It's about having my work seen and appreciated while I'm still alive to witness it. It's about knowing that I created something meaningful." Your paintings hanging in our house for the past 8 years weren't meaningful enough? They were meaningful to me, Jessica said. But they were also just for us. This exhibition is about sharing my work with the world, about contributing something to the artistic community I've always felt part of. Michael shook his head in disgust. The artistic community? Right. A bunch of pretentious people standing around drinking wine and pretending to understand art. The contempt in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just skepticism about the exhibition. This was fundamental disrespect for everything Jessica cared about. He had never taken her art seriously, and he wasn't going to start now, even when she was dying. 2 days before the exhibition opening, Jessica collapsed in the gallery while we were making final adjustments to the wall text. The stress of the preparations combined with her advancing illness had finally overwhelmed her body. I rushed her to the emergency room, where Dr. Martinez admitted her for observation and pain management. "I'm not going to be able to attend my own opening," Jessica said from her hospital bed, tears streaming down her face. "I've worked so hard for this, and now I'm going to miss it." "No, you're not," I said firmly. "We'll figure something out. Maybe you can come for just an hour, just to see people's reactions to your work." "Sarah, be realistic," Michael said from the corner of the room where he had been standing with his arms crossed. "Jessica is too sick to be gallivanting around at art exhibitions. She needs to be in the hospital getting proper medical care." "She needs to see her life's work celebrated," I replied. "We can arrange for a wheelchair, for medical supervision. There has to be a way." Dr. Martinez entered the room just as the tension between Michael and me was reaching a breaking point. "How are you feeling, Jessica?" he asked, checking her chart. "Disappointed," she said honestly. "I have an art exhibition opening tomorrow night, and I'm afraid I'm going to be too sick to attend." "Tell me about the exhibition," Dr. Martinez said, pulling up a chair beside her bed. Jessica's face lit up as she described the show, the paintings she had selected, and the response from Patricia Morrison and the gallery staff. As she talked, I could see some of her energy returning. "This sounds like something very important to you," Dr. Martinez observed when she finished. "It's the most important thing I've ever done professionally," Jessica said. "It represents 30 years of work." Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think we can arrange for you to attend the opening, at least for a short time. We'll need to coordinate with the nursing staff and possibly arrange for a medical escort, but if this is truly important to you, we should make it happen." The relief and gratitude on Jessica's face were overwhelming. "Really? You think it's possible?" "I think that quality of life includes participating in meaningful events when possible," Dr. Martinez said with a smile. "Let's make some calls and see what we can arrange." As the doctor left to make arrangements, Jessica turned to Michael with hope in her eyes. "Will you come with me tomorrow night? Will you be there to see my work displayed?" Michael was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with conflicting emotions. Finally he spoke, but his words weren't what Jessica was hoping to hear. "I'll be there," he said, "but I want you to know that I think this is a mistake. I think you're risking your health for something that ultimately doesn't matter." Even in her weakened state, Jessica's response was clear and strong. "It matters to me, Michael, and that should be enough." The Forbes article changed everything. Rising Stars, 30 Under 30 Entrepreneurs Reshaping Their Industries, featured Morrison Events as one of Chicago's fastest-growing luxury event planning companies, with a photo of me standing in the penthouse venue where I had just executed a flawless product launch for a major tech company. The writer had praised my innovative approach to experiential marketing and my ability to, quote, "create intimate luxury experiences that rival those in New York and Los Angeles." 3 years. It had taken me 3 years to build Morrison Events from a desperate escape plan into a 7-figure business with 12 full-time employees and a client waiting list that stretched 6 months into the future. We had moved into a sleek office space in River North, complete with a showroom where potential clients could experience our attention to detail firsthand. My personal life had evolved too. I owned a stunning 2-bedroom condo overlooking the lake, drove a silver BMW that I had paid for in cash, and maintained a wardrobe that reflected my status as one of Chicago's most sought-after event planners. But it wasn't just about the money or the recognition. I had become someone completely different from the naive woman who had once believed that love and loyalty were enough to protect her from betrayal. The new Sarah Morrison was strategic, self-reliant, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting what she had built. I had learned to trust my instincts, to value actions over words, and to never again make my happiness dependent on someone else's choices. The Forbes article had been online for exactly 4 hours when my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in over 3 years. Jessica. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my finger hovering over the decline button. Part of me was curious about what she could possibly want after all this time. The larger part of me knew that nothing good could come from reopening that particular wound. I answered on the 4th ring. "Hello, Jessica." "Sarah." Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, that carefully modulated tone she used when she wanted something. "I saw the Forbes article. Congratulations. You look incredible." "Thank you." I kept my voice neutral, professional. "What can I do for you?" There was a pause, and I could hear the uncertainty she was trying to hide. "I was hoping we could talk. I know it's been a long time, and I know things ended badly between us, but I miss you. You're my sister." The words hit me like a physical blow. 3 years ago, those same words might have broken down my defenses completely. The old Sarah had always been susceptible to Jessica's particular brand of emotional manipulation. The way she could make her selfishness sound like love, and her betrayal seem like an unfortunate accident. "You miss me," I repeated slowly. "That's interesting timing, Jessica. You haven't missed me for 3 years, but suddenly after a magazine article mentions my success, you're feeling sentimental about our sisterly bond." "That's not fair," she protested, and I could hear the defensive edge creeping into her voice. "I've wanted to reach out for a long time. I just didn't know if you were ready to hear from me." "Ready to hear what exactly? Your explanation for why you destroyed my life? Your apology for stealing my fiancé on my wedding day? Or maybe you want to share how wonderful your marriage to Michael has been?" The silence stretched between us, heavy with 3 years of unspoken resentment and pain. When Jessica finally spoke again, her voice was smaller, more vulnerable than I had ever heard it. "Michael and I got divorced 6 months ago." I closed my eyes, processing this information and the complex emotions it triggered. Part of me felt vindicated, proven right in my belief that a relationship built on betrayal couldn't possibly last. But another part of me felt something unexpected. Pity. Not for Jessica's pain, but for the waste of it all. She had destroyed our family, humiliated me publicly, and ruined my business, all for a marriage that had lasted less than 3 years. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Not because I wished things had worked out differently, but because I genuinely felt sorry for the woman who had thought that stealing someone else's life would make her happy. "Sarah, I know I hurt you terribly. I know what Michael and I did was unforgivable, but we're family, and I'm hoping that maybe enough time has passed that we could try to rebuild our relationship. I need my sister back." There it was, the real reason for the call. Jessica was alone, divorced, and apparently looking for someone to provide the emotional support she had always taken for granted. She had called me not because she had genuinely missed our relationship, but because she needed something from me. "What about Mom and Dad?" I asked. "How are they handling your divorce?" Another pause. "They're disappointed, obviously. They really liked Michael. And they're worried about me, about how I'm going to manage financially." Of course they were. Jessica had never been financially independent, moving from our parents' support directly into Michael's wealth, without ever developing the skills or drive to support herself. Now that the money was gone, she was probably facing the same kind of financial uncertainty that had once driven me to build my own business. "I'm sure they are," I replied carefully. "What are your plans now?" "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. I know you've done incredibly well with your business in Chicago. I was wondering if maybe there might be an opportunity for me to work with Morrison Events. I have experience in marketing and coordination, and I think I could really contribute to what you're building." The audacity was breathtaking. Jessica wanted me to hire her, to bring her into the business I had built from the ashes of the life she had destroyed. She wanted to benefit from my success after being directly responsible for my failure. It was manipulation so brazen that I almost admired it. "You want me to give you a job," I said slowly. "I want us to work together. As a team, like we always talked about when we were kids." I remembered those conversations. Late-night whispers in the bedroom we had shared growing up, about how we would always be best friends, how we would support each other no matter what, how nothing would ever come between us. The memory felt like looking at artifacts from someone else's life. Jessica, let me make sure I understand this correctly. You destroyed my engagement, my business, and my reputation. You caused me to lose my home and my financial security. You made me a laughingstock in Boston social circles. And now, 3 years later, after your marriage to my former fiancé has fallen apart, you want me to rescue you by giving you a job at the company I built to recover from the damage you caused. When you put it like that, it sounds terrible, she said defensively. But people make mistakes, Sarah. I was young and confused, and I fell in love. I never meant for things to happen the way they did. You didn't fall in love accidentally, Jessica. You made a series of calculated choices to pursue a relationship with my fiancé while pretending to be my maid of honor. You chose to betray me, and you chose to humiliate me publicly. Those weren't mistakes. They were decisions. I could hear her crying now, the soft sniffles that had always been her go-to strategy when direct manipulation failed. I know you hate me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm drowning here, Sarah. I don't have anywhere else to turn. And there it was. The truth beneath all the talk about missing me and wanting to rebuild our relationship. Jessica was in trouble, probably financial trouble, and she had decided that I was her best option for a rescue. It was exactly the same dynamic that had defined our entire relationship. Jessica making poor choices and expecting me to clean up the mess. What happened to the divorce settlement? I asked. There wasn't much of one. Michael's lawyers were very thorough about the prenup. I got some money, but not enough to live on long term. And the job market in Boston is difficult for someone with my background. The job market in Boston was difficult for someone with her background because everyone in Boston's professional circles knew exactly who Jessica Morrison Chen was and what she had done. Her reputation preceded her in ways that made her essentially unemployable in any industry that valued loyalty and discretion. I see, I said neutrally. Sarah, please. I know I don't have any right to ask for your help, but I'm desperate. I'll do anything to make things right between us. Anything? I asked, an idea beginning to form in my mind. Yes, anything. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, looking out at the Chicago skyline that had become my domain. 3 years ago, I had been the one who was desperate, alone, and facing financial ruin. Jessica had watched my downfall with detached sympathy, more concerned about building her new life with Michael than helping her sister recover from the wreckage. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice taking on the authoritative tone I used with difficult vendors. You're gonna call Mom and Dad and tell them the truth about what really happened 3 years ago. Not the sanitized version, where you and Michael fell in love accidentally, but the real story about how you pursued him while I was planning our wedding. Sarah, I can't do that. It would destroy my relationship with them. Your relationship with them is based on a lie, Jessica. They think you're the victim of a failed marriage, when you're actually the architect of betrayal that destroyed 2 families. If you want my help, you're going to start by telling the truth. And if I do that, if I tell them everything, will you consider helping me? I smiled, looking at my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me was confident, successful, and completely in control of her destiny. I'll consider it, I said, but my help will come with conditions that you might not like. What kind of conditions? The kind that will ensure you understand the true cost of your choices. Call our parents, Jessica. Tell them the truth. And then we'll discuss what kind of future you might have. I hung up before she could respond, then immediately called my assistant to cancel my afternoon meetings. If Jessica was going to implode the carefully constructed narrative she had been living with for 3 years, I wanted to be available to handle the fallout. My parents called 2 hours later, both of them on speakerphone, their voices shaking with shock and anger. Is it true? My mother asked without preamble. What Jessica just told us? About how things really happened with Michael? Every word, I confirmed. I'm sorry you had to learn about it this way, but yes, it's all true. She said they were having an affair for months before your wedding, my father said. his voice tight with controlled rage. She said they planned to run away together and that the car accident was just a coincidence. The car accident. I had never told them about that part, about how Jessica had been driving when we went to pick up my wedding shoes, about how she had been texting someone and had run a red light, sending us to the emergency room instead of to the final dress fitting. I had always assumed it was an accident, but now I wondered if Jessica had been texting Michael, planning their escape while I sat beside her excitedly talking about our future together. "Did you know?" my mother asked. "Before the wedding day, did you have any idea what was happening?" "No," I said quietly. I trusted them both completely. I never saw it coming. The silence that followed was heavy, with 3 years of misplaced sympathy and misdirected concern. My parents had spent years worrying about Jessica's adjustment to married life and her eventual divorce, while treating my recovery as a natural process that didn't require much attention or support. "We failed you," my father said finally. "We should have seen through her lies. We should have been there for you when you needed us most." "You believed the story that made the most sense," I replied. Jessica was always very convincing when she wanted to be. "What can we do now?" my mother asked. "How can we make this right?" "You can't," I said gently, "but you can stop enabling Jessica's behavior and start holding her accountable for her choices. She's going to need to learn how to support herself without relying on other people to clean up her messes." After we hung up, I sat in my office thinking about the conversation with Jessica and the strange satisfaction I felt at finally being able to tell the complete truth about what had happened. For 3 years, I had carried the weight of their betrayal alone, unable to defend myself against the narrative they had constructed without seeming bitter or vindictive. Now the truth was finally out, and the consequences were exactly what they should have been. Jessica was facing the reality of building a life without a safety net, just as I had been forced to do. The difference was that I had faced that challenge with determination and integrity, while she was approaching it with the same sense of entitlement that had characterized her entire adult life. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. I told them everything. Now what? I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching something I had been considering for months: expanding Morrison events to other cities. Boston would be the obvious choice for our first satellite office, given my existing knowledge of the market and the contacts I had maintained there over the years. It would also give me the opportunity to return to the city where my story had begun, not as the broken woman who had fled in shame, but as the successful entrepreneur who had built something remarkable from the ashes of her former life. The symmetry was too perfect to ignore. I picked up my phone and typed a response to Jessica. "We'll discuss your future when I'm back in Boston next month. I'm opening a new office there, and I might have a position available for someone with the right qualifications and attitude." Her response came immediately. "Really? You'd consider hiring me?" "I'd consider letting you earn a position," I wrote back. "But it would be at the bottom, with no special treatment, and with the understanding that your employment would depend entirely on your performance and ability to follow directions. Are you interested in that kind of opportunity?" The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times before her final response came through. "Yes, I'll take it," I smiled and set my phone aside. Jessica thought she was getting a rescue, but what she was actually getting was a front-row seat to watch me reclaim everything she had tried to take from me. When I returned to Boston, it would be as the owner of a multi-million-dollar business, the featured entrepreneur in Forbes magazine, and the woman who had turned her betrayal into the motivation for extraordinary success. The old Sarah Morrison had been destroyed on a wedding day 3 years ago. The woman who had returned to Boston was someone entirely different, stronger, smarter, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting what she had built. Jessica wanted a job, and I was going to give her exactly what she deserved. The funeral parlor in Millbrook was exactly as I remembered it from my childhood. All dark wood and hushed voices and the overwhelming scent of lilies. Grandpa Thomas had lived to 93, sharp as a tack until the very end, and his passing had brought together relatives I hadn't seen in years. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, adjusting the collar of my black Armani suit and checking my reflection in the Maserati's tinted windows. 4 years. It had been 4 years since I'd left Boston, broken and humiliated, and I was returning as someone completely transformed. Morrison Events now operated in 3 cities, employed 47 people, and had been featured in Architectural Digest, Town and Country, and Inc. magazine. The woman who had once begged her sister for explanations was now a millionaire several times over. With a penthouse in Chicago, a house in the Hamptons, and enough influence to make or break careers in the events industry. I walked through the funeral home doors with the confident stride of someone who had nothing to hide and everything to be proud of. The receiving line was already forming, family members and old family friends waiting to pay their respects. I recognized most of the faces, though many looked surprised to see me. The last time most of them had encountered me, I was the pitied sister who had been abandoned at the altar. "Sarah?" My cousin Amanda's voice carried across the room, loud enough to draw attention from nearby mourners. "Oh my God, look at you!" I smiled and accepted her enthusiastic hug, aware that conversations were pausing around us as people registered my presence. Amanda had always been the family gossip, which made her reaction particularly valuable. Her obvious approval would ripple through the room faster than any formal announcement. "You look absolutely stunning," she continued, stepping back to take in my appearance. "I saw the article in Forbes, and Mom showed me the pictures from that charity gala in Chicago. I can't believe how incredible you're doing." "Thank you," I replied graciously. Grandpa would have been proud to see the family business thriving. It was a subtle reference to the work ethic Grandpa Thomas had instilled in all of us, positioning my success as a continuation of family values rather than a reaction to personal trauma. The distinction was important for the narrative I wanted to establish. I made my way through the room, greeting relatives and family friends with warmth and confidence. Each conversation reinforced the same message. I had not just survived the betrayal that had once defined me, I had transformed it into the foundation for extraordinary achievement. The broken woman they remembered was gone, replaced by someone who commanded respect rather than sympathy. That's when I saw her. Jessica stood near the back of the room, partially hidden behind a group of our father's cousins. She looked older than her 30 years, stress and disappointment etched in lines around her eyes that expensive makeup couldn't completely conceal. Her black dress was elegant, but clearly not new, and I noticed she was wearing the same earrings she had worn to high school graduation 15 years ago. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and I watched her face cycle through shock, recognition, and something that might have been fear. She had seen the magazine articles, of course, but witnessing my transformation in person was clearly different from seeing photographs. I was no longer the sister she had betrayed and discarded. I was someone she needed to reckon with. I excused myself from the conversation I was having and walked deliberately toward her. The crowd seemed to part instinctively, sensing the significance of this encounter even if they didn't understand its full context. "Hello, Jessica," I said when I reached her, my voice carrying just enough warmth to seem appropriate for a family funeral, while making it clear that this was not a reconciliation. "Sarah." She looked uncertain, younger somehow than the confident woman who had once stolen my fiancé without apparent remorse. "You look incredible." "Thank you." "How are you?" It was a loaded question, and we both knew it. Jessica's life since her divorce had been a series of failures and false starts. The job I had offered her at Morrison Events' Boston office had lasted exactly 6 months before I had terminated her employment for chronic lateness and attitude problems. She had struggled to find work afterward, eventually taking a position at a small marketing firm for a fraction of what she had once earned. "I'm doing well," she lied, lifting her chin with a flash of the old defiance. "Working at Preston Marketing downtown. It's a good opportunity." Preston Marketing was barely above a startup, the kind of place that hired people other companies wouldn't touch. But I simply nodded politely, allowing her to maintain whatever dignity she needed in this public setting. "That's wonderful. I'm glad things are working out for you." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Michael Chen. I hadn't expected to see him at Grandpa Thomas's funeral, but apparently his connection to our family through marriage, however brief, had been enough to warrant an invitation. He looked exactly as I remembered him, still handsome in his expensive suit, though there was something diminished about his presence that hadn't been there 4 years ago. "Sarah," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I heard about your success with Morrison Events. Congratulations." "Thank you, Michael. I understand congratulations are in order for you as well." "I heard about your engagement." His new fiancée was a pharmaceutical heiress, someone with old money and social connections that would serve his business interests well. The engagement had been announced in the society pages of the Boston Globe just 3 months after his divorce from Jessica was finalized. Apparently, his capacity for moving quickly between relationships hadn't changed. "Yes, we're very happy," he said, though something flickered in his eyes that suggested the topic made him uncomfortable. I glanced between Michael and Jessica, noting the careful distance they maintained from each other and the way they avoided eye contact. Whatever passion had driven them to destroy my life had clearly burned out, leaving behind only awkwardness and regret. "I should pay my respects to Grandpa," I said, gesturing toward the casket where other family members were gathered. "It was good to see you both." I walked away before either of them could respond, aware that I was leaving them to stand together in uncomfortable silence. It was a small power play, but a satisfying one. 4 years ago, they had held all the cards, able to dictate the terms of my humiliation. Now they were the ones left scrambling to maintain their composure in my presence. The receiving line moved slowly, giving me time to observe the room and the subtle dynamics playing out around me. I could see people whispering about my transformation, comparing the confident woman before them to their memories of the devastated bride who had fled Boston. The narrative was shifting in real time, from pity to admiration, from victim to victor. My parents approached as I was speaking with Grandpa's longtime neighbors, their faces a mixture of pride and regret. They had spent the years since Jessica's confession trying to make amends for their unwitting role in my isolation, but the damage had been done. Our relationship was cordial now, but it would never return to the unconditional trust of my childhood. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," my mother said, squeezing my hand. "Grandpa would have been thrilled to see how far you've come." "He was always telling us about your magazine features," my father added. "Kept every article in a scrapbook on his coffee table." The image of my 93-year-old grandfather carefully cutting out magazine articles about my business success brought unexpected tears to my eyes. He had believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, maintaining faith in my recovery when everyone else saw only wreckage. As the formal ceremony began, I found myself seated between my parents, with Jessica and Michael several rows behind us. I could feel their eyes on me throughout the service, could sense their awareness of how completely our positions had reversed. The woman they had dismissed as collateral damage in their love story had become someone they now had to respect, whether they wanted to or not. During the eulogy, our cousin David mentioned Grandpa's philosophy about resilience and determination, about how he had built his small business from nothing through sheer force of will and refusal to accept defeat. The words resonated through the chapel, and I felt several people glance in my direction, recognizing the parallel between Grandpa's story and my own. After the service, as we gathered in the parking lot before heading to the cemetery, Jessica approached me one final time. She looked nervous, but determined, as if she had been working up the courage for this conversation throughout the entire funeral. "Sarah, I need to say something," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you probably don't want to hear it, but I have to try." I waited, curious to see what final gambit she had prepared. I was wrong. About everything. About Michael. About what I thought would make me happy. About how I treated you. I destroyed the most important relationship in my life for something that was never real. I know it's too late to fix what I broke, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I threw away. She paused, struggling with emotions that seemed genuine for the first time in our adult relationship. "You became everything I thought I wanted to be, but you did it the right way. Through work and talent and integrity. I took shortcuts and hurt people, and I've been paying for it ever since. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I see who you really are now, and I'm ashamed of who I was." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or strategic calculation. But all I saw was genuine remorse, and the recognition that came too late to matter. Jessica had finally understood the cost of her choices, but understanding didn't undo the damage or restore what had been lost. "Thank you for saying that," I replied simply. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't cruelty either. It was the response of someone who had moved so far beyond the betrayal that it no longer had the power to define her relationships or choices. As I drove away from the cemetery in my Maserati, I caught sight of Jessica and Michael in my rearview mirror, standing awkwardly beside their separate cars, no longer connected by passion or even mutual respect. They had gotten exactly what they thought they wanted 4 years ago, and it had brought them nothing but disappointment and isolation. I, on the other hand, had lost everything, and discovered in the process that I was capable of building something better than anything I had imagined. The woman who had once planned her entire future around someone else's approval was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the only security worth having was the kind you created through your own efforts and integrity. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant in Chicago. 3 new clients were requesting meetings for major events, and Forbes wanted to do a follow-up feature on Morrison Events' expansion into international markets. I smiled and accelerated toward the highway, leaving Millbrook and all its ghosts behind me. The transformation was complete. The victim had become the victor, not through revenge or bitterness, but through the simple act of refusing to let someone else's betrayal define the limits of her potential. Jessica had stolen my billionaire husband, but in doing so, she had given me something far more valuable: the motivation to become someone who didn't need anyone else's wealth or approval to live an extraordinary life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.